Good evening, and welcome to the annual Oweida Lecture on Journalism and Ethics. I'm Walter Middlebrook, the Foster Professor of Practice in the Belisario College of Communications. The department is pleased to host this annual event that brings leading figures from journalism and academia to campus to discuss news ethics. The Oweida Lecture fits beautifully within the College of Communications' overarching curricular, programmatic, and research emphasis on ethics in mass communication. In other words, striving always to do the right thing. Our college puts a premium on teaching ethics. We want our students to understand that being a great journalist requires more than being a dogged reporter, a compelling writer, the fastest tweeter, or a great videographer. Journalists have a moral responsibility to be honest, accurate, and free of bias to sources, to consumers of news, and to society as a whole. Tonight's presentation is the college's premier event when it comes to teaching news media. 2 decades ago, Peg Oweida endorsed this lecture in the memory of her husband, Dr. Nick Oweida, who came to the United States from Lebanon in 1950. He set up what would become a successful medical practice in New Kensington, Pennsylvania. Dr. Oweida built an outstanding reputation and was elected president of the medical staff of the local hospital, only to have that reputation tarnished when a newspaper recklessly suggested that he had not shown good judgment, that he had performed unnecessary surgeries, and that he had made incorrect diagnoses of his patients. Dr. Oweida sued to restore his present reputation, and he was successful. Peg Oweida decided to establish this lecture series so that the Penn State community could learn more about the importance of ethics. We used this occasion to stay focused on that mission. Despite the growing number of reported lapses by journalists, professionals acting unethically by lying, cheating, stealing, publishing stories without checking facts, or invading people's privacy and just simply being unfair, we are to be reminded that the majority of news media have never been more ethically responsible than we are today. Media outlets today employ some of the best educated, most conscientious journalists in history, and they are dedicated to holding introspective conversations about how the news should be reported in an ethical manner. Tonight's speaker comes through the ranks to lead and manage a number of journalists and newsrooms through a myriad of ethical dilemmas. Our speaker, Glenn Proctor, is a former editor, vice president of the Richmond, Virginia Times-Dispatch, who left the business to become the founder and lead trainer of Red Job LLC, a company based in Charlotte, North Carolina. The company serves as his vehicle for coaching and training clients nationwide. Glenn's journalism career includes stints at the Newark, New Jersey Star-Ledger, the Rochester Democrat and Chronicle in New York, the Courier-Journal of Louisville, Kentucky, and the Akron Beacon Journal. He has chosen the topic, shortcuts, speed and success. Who is responsible for our ethics? Oh, and did I mention that Glenn is a very proud former Marine who goes by the nickname Gunny? After his remarks, please join us in a question and answer session using the microphones that we'll be bringing out to you. And with that, I'll say, look alive, soldiers. Give a Penn State welcome to Glenn Gunny Proctor.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Again, one more time. Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Thank you. Boy, I know you students are tired. You've been in class all day. I mean, come on, give me more than that. I came to the cold tundra from Charlotte, where it's 75 or 80, and you know, the high today was what, 52 or something. So I'm not used to that. But yes, I am very proud to be here and part of this lecture series and following in the footsteps of folks that I know and admire. David Folkenflik from NPR, Kelly McBride from Poynter Institute, and a longtime buddy, Mark Russell, editor-in-chief of the Memphis First Commercial Appeal. And a special shout out to my long time friend, colleague, and journalism buddy, Professor Middlebrook. Okay, I never studied ethics. I started back in the industry when they were hiring people without journalism degrees. They were hiring people, some of us, because unfortunately they didn't have enough people of color in the industry when I came through. And I was fortunate enough to get hired at a local paper in suburban Philadelphia. So I never studied ethics in college, and all the ethics I learned were on the job. And when I did go to college, I was an accounting major, which of course accounting also has very strong ethics, as do a lot of major industries that we're involved in. Yes, started my career at the Daily Local News in Westchester, Pennsylvania, and I learned everything on the job. I know for you younger students, you may not know, but one of my desk mates was the Herald of Dave Barry, a institution in journalism as a humor columnist. And why did I become a journalist? I was in the Marines, and then I was working in a steel mill and taking a couple courses, but I did not see people in journalism that looked like me. And so by chance, I ended up talking to an editor of this small paper, and I took a bunch of poetry. I had been writing poetry since I was 8 years old, and I took poetry to my interview as kind of my writing samples. And a month or so later, after talking to me and giving me a writing test and all that, they hired me, and so my career began. And of course, the ethics thing, having been a Marine and also studying accounting, both of those organizations have strong ethics, so I kind of understood ethics per se before I became a journalist, but then of course I learned the rest on the job. And at my first newspaper, I was the only black reporter, so that was my first ethics dilemma. Do I write about black folks in a positive way, or do I stick to the standards of journalism to be fair, accurate, and tell the truth regardless of the situation? Well, I of course made up my mind that I was going to be a true journalist first, and unfortunately, like the little mantra goes, let the chips fall, and that has kept me afloat as a journalist for all those years. And in all my jobs, I kind of had that dilemma, because as I rose up the ladder, folks would be asking me basically to bend my integrity based on, are you a black editor? And I'm like, no, I am the editor. I am not a black editor. I am the editor. And so I had that conversation in at least 3 of the places where I worked, where city council members or black preachers would come to me and ask me about basically my integrity as a black man and how I was going to cover their community. So I kind of solved that problem by just being a true journalist and very true to journalism. So how should we define ethics? Is there a template for ethical behavior? Who's responsible for our ethics? I surveyed as I was preparing for this lecture, I surveyed a number of my journalism colleagues, some that are still in the industry, some that have went to PR, and others who have become entrepreneurs. And I will read verbatim their answers. treating everyone and every situation like as if I would like to be treated if the roles were reversed. When I think of ethics, the first thing that comes to mind is what's right and wrong. To me, ethics are the principles or worldview that guide our decisions of right and wrong. Always do what is right and what you would expect of your peers. If it doesn't feel right, it's probably not right. Ask yourself, is this worth damaging my professional reputation? For journalists, not taking money, meals, drinks, or gifts in exchange for stories or special access. And my favorite, consciously doing the right thing and leaving the gain out of it. And for those 5 people, the central theme is right and wrong. As Professor Middlebrook, mentioned in his opening, personally and professionally, what decisions do we make? And especially as journalists, what decisions do we make? And the key words that society uses to define ethical behavior are familiar: fairness, concern and respect for others, integrity, self-control, trust, and transparency. So, but with that, where are we with ethics in today's society? Most industries, as I mentioned, have a code of ethics as part of their standards of operation and performance. But are we there? With journalists, I think we are. AP has a very strong code of ethics. The Society of Professional Journalists, they lay out their integrity rules in 4 lessons, 4 principles. Seek and report the truth, be accurate and fair, minimize harm. Suspects and sources all deserve our respect. Serve the public, avoid conflicts of interest, be accountable and transparent. Take responsibility for your work. Acknowledge and correct mistakes and explain clarifications. All 4 of SPJ's principles came into play when I was at the Star-Ledger in New Jersey. I was an assistant managing editor in charge of our statewide bureau system, and we had something like 12 bureaus throughout the state. Well, one day we published an above-the-fold page 1 story about a murder suspect. It was a heinous crime in one of the communities that we covered, and so we were waiting for days to find out who the police were going to arrest. Well, my bureau chief talked to his reporter, and his reporter said we were solid, and so I made the call and we went with it. We published the wrong name. Well, I took the heat for that. As the senior editor, I took the heat for that. Yes, of course, my bureau chief and the reporter got slammed a bit, but I took the heat for that as the senior person. And that's one thing I had learned earlier as a Marine. The higher rank, you take the heat. And for that situation, which we had ended up with a page 1 correction, and of course talking to the family. And so it was, and for me, it was probably one of the worst experiences of my 40-year journalism career, because I really had to eat crow on that one. But with that, corrections and clarifications are a matter of us doing the right thing. If we make a mistake on a blog, in a video, in print, in a broadcast, we must correct it. Or if people are asking some of our motivations behind it or need a clarification on a story, a part of a story, we need to make that. We have to do that. We're implored as journalists to, again, do the right thing. So, for me, it's been a long road, and yes, I've come upon a whole lot of ethics scenarios, you know, as a reporter, as a young editor, and then as a top editor. You know, I talked about earlier about, you know, when people were questioning my integrity, you know, as a black journalist, you know, and that was a early part of my career. But then, during the middle of my career, I went back on active duty as a Marine. And I went to the Defense's journalism school in Indiana, and then ended up as the editor of the base newspaper at Camp Lejeune in North Carolina, which is one of the two major Marine Corps bases, one on the East Coast and one on the West Coast. And military ethics in journalism are not the same as civilian journalists. You know, there were a lot of things that I couldn't say and couldn't put in the newspaper, and a lot of things that my staff couldn't cover. So that was, you know, that was interesting. I mean, I enjoyed my time there being the editor of the paper, but I also knew that that was a situation that I had to end, because that did not make me feel right. Although what I did, going from that situation, I went right into another situation. I became the press secretary for U.S. Congressman Dan Micah from Florida. So I was working on Capitol Hill. And if we know anything about Congress and government officials, again, the ethics are different. The ethics are quite different. You know, he's out to please his constituents and fundraisers, and there are certain things that I couldn't say in his speeches, and it just gave me, for the second time, a weird feeling, because I was still used to the ethical scenarios that we practiced in daily civilian journalism. But then I got rid of both of those situations and went back to the grind. I went back and became the assistant managing editor of a newspaper in Davenport, Iowa. And that went pretty well, although the black folks in the community, since I was the only black person in the newsroom at one time, they came after me again, and, you know, what kind of person are you going to be to support our community? I'm going to be a good journalist. That's my retort, and I'm sticking to it. So yeah, and then I become the editor-in-chief in Richmond, Virginia. And right a couple months before I came to Richmond, they had a big ethics case where one of the graphics in the features department was stolen from one of the cooking magazines. And it was the exact same photo, And of course, the magazine folks, they raised hell about it, and, you know, big correction and a mea culpa. I mean, I wasn't part of that, but that happened probably a couple months before I got there. But when I got there, I ended up with a big plagiarism case. Leonard Downey Jr., some of you older folks who you know, been around the industry for a while, Leonard Downey Jr. was editor of the Post, of the Washington Post. So he calls me one day in Richmond and says, "We got a problem. We have a plagiarism case." So my DC reporter was, you know, a bunch of reporters were writing stories about immigration issues, and Leonard Downey told me that, oh yeah, one of my reporters had lifted key pieces of stories from the Post stories. And, you know, of course, that took me and my senior staff into an investigation, and we found out that there were quite a few things that were taken from the Post stories, and also including a situation where he described scenes and he was never there. So that was, again, I mean, that was a situation that I had to handle. And so I called him in, and he was fired on the spot. And I had HR and everybody in the room, and he was fired on the spot. And some of his colleagues, he had been at the paper for, 15, 16 years. Some of his colleagues tried to fight for him to keep him, but I'm like, no. That's the most gravest thing that we can do as journalists is plagiarism, at least in my estimation. And so, yes, I fired him on the spot, and he was immediately ushered out of the building. So yes, I've had, those and just some minor situations, dealing with ethics and values throughout my long career. So, I realized that ethics for some of the professors here and some of the students may be much deeper than just saying do the right thing. But in a piece that Jennifer Downs wrote in the Ethics in Forensic Science journal, she wrote, "How ought we live? This question represents the foundation of centuries of debate concerning the philosophy of ethics. Even then," she concludes, "there is no consensus because each philosopher took a distinct stance on morality." So, is the study of ethics greater than just the meaning of right and wrong? Well, that's up for all of you to decide. But to have ethics mentioned in a simplistic manner, I know would cause Homer, Aristotle, Socrates, and a number of today's ethicists, they would probably blanch at the notion of just, it's more than do the right thing. But really, is it? Ethics, like many things in our society, though, right now, I think has turned a corner. Even though I believe that journalism is still doing a great job ethically in our society, I think that everybody has come to the opinion that everybody has their own personal and professional values and morals. And, we can look at Washington or other places and see that, and judge for ourselves where their sense of morality is going. And one thing I hear all the time is when you talk about even a question of values, morality, ethics, judgment, it depends. It depends. It depends on what camp you're in, possibly. Because we have political ethics, we have social media ethics, we have business ethics, we have cultural ethics, even in your own families. You have family ethics. So, where are we? And now we have the pandemic upon us. Have things changed ethically with the pandemic? These past 2 years have changed us. We've become a different America, a different world, a different people. Whether we realize it or not, we are in a different place. Warren Buffett, in talking to his shareholders during Berkshire Hathaway's annual meeting, he talks about the red lines in business and how they're being crossed, and how too many people and too many businesses are taking shortcuts for profit, are firing people unceremoniously. And the business texture is, according to Mr. Buffett, is we're out of shape. Think that was the exact term that he used. We're out of shape. There are schemes, there are scams, there are hacks. So watch yourself. Watch yourself. Business. I love talking about business and being part of the business world, but I know business has its own issues when it comes to ethics. our politics, our communication, our daily interactions, and social media. I know people beat up on social media all the time. I love social media, but I know it also has become a Wild West, and anything goes. You know, when you think about social media, think about what Aretha Franklin's sang. The title of the song is Respect. And I have my own definition of society today, and it's called Life on Rush. As the pandemic began, I wrote a 6-part leadership series, and it's posted on a couple websites around the country. But just talking about our civility, talking about, you know, where I thought we were falling short as a society, and I was hoping at that time that we wouldn't get any worse. But unfortunately, with fighting on airplanes and just, you know, shades of disrespect in a lot of scenarios, I think we've fallen short. And the look for respect, empathy, trust, we need to get back there. We need to get back there. And you as journalists and student journalists, and as you go out into your careers, you know, I hope that you remember that. We need respect, empathy, and trust. You know, think about, you know, any of you that want to be political reporters, you got a job to do. You got a big job to do, because, you know, our politics is broken. At least I believe so. And so if you're covering politics or kind of public discourse, you know, you have a job on your hands, but make sure that you continue to follow the codes of ethics that you've learned here and throughout, you know, your career. Journalism, you know, in talking to a couple of educators, not only here, but around the country, they talk about news and opinion blurring the lines. So, what's the difference between real news and opinion? And too often, you know, we see all the folks on TV and you know, they call themselves news people and they call themselves correspondents, and out of their mouth is nothing but opinion. So we need to make sure that we understand the difference between what is edited, vetted news information versus what is opinion. And more importantly, what is disinformation, and how that is really hurting us as real journalists, you know, because too many people are listening to the disinformation, because some of the disinformation gurus are screaming the loudest. So that makes our job as journalists that much harder. You know, 3 things that, you know, some journalism professors and news folks told me, that, you know, adherence to boundaries. You know, some of the reporters want to post on their personal accounts the same information that they're covering in their beats, and then adding opinion to it. You know, for me, that's an absolute no-no. You know, you can't post, you know, that kind of information that you're using to put in your news reports, and especially, you know, making editorial and opinion judgments about it. Putting more depth into reporting, making sure that you have enough sources in your reporting to make it relevant and fair to all parties. Reporters don't read enough to really understand the history and the context of a subject. Well, I know everything is TikTok time now and instantaneous. You have to get something on the web, but oftentimes getting that on the web, it's wrong. You know, it has no context, and so people that really don't want that much, they really don't learn anything, and they just take that snippet and run with it, and oftentimes it's not fair, and more importantly, it's not conclusive. Harvard Business Review piece titled The Psychology of Unethical Behavior, they talk about 3 dynamics that leads to unethical behavior. Omnipotence, when someone feels so entitled, they believe the rules don't apply to them. Cultural numbness, when others play along and just accept what their boss or someone else is saying, unsavory definitions of other people or situations, or just truly bad behaviors. And thirdly, justified neglect. Again, you don't talk because you're afraid to mess up your standing, or you're afraid that you won't get your bonus, or you're afraid that you'll be in bad stead with your boss. Those are very wrong. Those are very wrong, because we have to think about how often we face the dilemma of getting the reward versus doing what is right. As journalists, how many times have we been told, oh, don't do that story, or don't quote me, because that'll shine a bad light on individual, family, business, public, or private organization. Again, as the Harvard piece notes, we must find our own professional moral compass, follow organizational codes, and seek input from trusted advisors or mentors. The key, the story notes, keep your integrity intact. And one thing comes to mind is sourcing. When I was a journalist, we needed to have 2 confirmed sources to publish a story. And I see in some of the best publications and the best news websites in America where an unidentified source said, that's one person. Hopefully that person is right, but I didn't grow up with that, and I think we should still adhere to that. And I know, again, it's get it quick, be first, no matter what. Also with sourcing, too many media outlets are using another source as their source. You have embedded that other source, you have no idea who it is, but yet, they're using another publication or another outlet as their source for a story. And that, that to me is absolutely out of the question as ethical journalists. No hearsay, no hearsay. Source your own pieces. Source your own pieces, that way you can trust. But as I close, I have 3 questions for all of us. Have we put personal and professional gain and success ahead of ethics, morality, and values? Has the pandemic caused us to say and do things that we didn't do previously? And thirdly, have we become a nation of shortcuts to get what we need and want at the expense of others? And how does that apply to us as journalists? Spike Lee, legendary filmmaker, whose 1989 film helped the cause of racial justice in America. And of course, the title of his movie was Do the Right Thing. Walter mentioned it, and I'll mention it again. Almost 33 years later, those 4 words still apply to journalists and to all of us. Do the right thing as journalists every single day. Thank you.
Go get yourself seated over there.
Okay. You gonna bring the mic?
Take one. That's my life. Hey, thanks, Glenn. Thank you again for those fine words of encouragement and everything. We're going to have a Q&A here where I'm going to push our speaker for a few things that I think and and we'll do that. But I wanted to give them a chance to get settled. And in the process, if any of you have questions, we're going to have a mic that's going to be floating around out there. Steve's going to bring that up for you. But I'm going to ask the first couple of questions, and then we'll leave it to you guys. Okay. I'm going to get in big trouble starting this off, just so you know. I'm going to be what they call the
So I don't get my own mic?
You get this one. I'm going to be the antagonistic the reporter here. So you never took ethics. Why should I listen to anything you're just telling me?
That's good. That's good. Because it's good information, and if you don't believe any of it, just look at SPJ's Code of Ethics, look at AP's Code of Ethics, listen to some of the things that your professors here have told you, about going into journalism, whether it's digital, whether it's print, whether it's broadcast, whether it's web. You still need a sense of ethics and to practice ethical behavior.
I see. So then the question I'm going to ask on behalf of my friends here, so what do you see are the biggest challenges for me, a young journalist getting ready to go out into the world?
For students or professors?
From the students' perspective, we're getting ready to go out in the world. What are my biggest challenges I'm going to get ready to face ethically or whatever?
Not being part of public pressure, because the pressures, and I can only imagine the pressure on you students, there's outside pressures, there's family pressures, there's, where we are in society, whether it's, racial unrest, whether it's economic distress, whether it's social media crazy, whether it's some mental health issues. I mean, there's a whole lot of scenarios that are out in the public space right now, and you students have to take care of yourself. One thing that Walter didn't mention is, I do mental health training and coaching and suicide prevention, and a lot of the clients and people I teach are students your age, because I've dealt with at least half a dozen cases of students, anywhere from starting at 6 to 25. And I know a lot of you fall in that category. So yes, there's a lot of pressures on you, not only to be a good journalism professional, but to be a good person. And with all the things that are thrown at you right now, and of course the pandemic with you not being in class, so you just have to take care of yourself as well, as humans, but also in your professional space.
Okay, now I'm gonna keep asking questions. If you guys do have questions, please feel free to jump up and raise your hand and let Steve know that you're out there, because I'll do it. But I'm gonna throw a curve at you here. I want you to define the word loyalty and what it means in a newsroom.
Loyalty in a newsroom. I worked in 8 different newsrooms, and loyalty was not there in some of them, but I was very blessed to work in 2 at the Akron Beacon Journal in Akron, Ohio, and the Star Ledger in Newark, New Jersey. And those were absolute newsrooms where everybody supported each other. Of course, we fought for page 1 space and the best investigative stories and all that, but by and large, everybody supported each other. If anybody was sick or anybody was hurt, or when, we won a couple Pulitzers during those times, and everybody applauded each other, and it was just a good time. But it's just like, it's being on a team, trusting your team members, and doing the best that you can every single day for the team, for the betterment of the team and the organization. That's what I consider newsroom loyalty.
And I'll be right there. I'm raising this question because you yourself left the newsroom to go work for a congressman. I know reporters, education reporters who end up going working for the school board, business reporters that end up going working for the companies that they've been covering.
Or state governments.
Or state governments. Where does that fit in the picture of journalism today? And I mean, we're training people to do all these skills, but in a newsroom, a reporter that Jean Patsky works out a contract with MSNBC before she's even left the White House, and she's going to MSNBC. Where does this fit in the field of ethical thinking, as it goes?
Well, that is very good. Well, yes, well, first, before I went and worked for Congressman Micah, I went back on active duty as a Marine because I was having some, personal problems and a divorce and some other things, and so I needed some structure in my life. So I went back on active duty as a Marine, and as I mentioned, became the editor of the newspaper at Camp Lejeune, and then working for Congressman Micah. And both of those scenarios, even though I loved the jobs, it bothered me a lot, ethically, because I had always hearkened back to, I'm a real journalist, why am I doing this? But there are a lot of my colleagues that have went on to PR jobs, that are academics, that working as flax for state government, and a lot of other jobs. And for some of them, it's a career choice, but it's interesting that some of the people that I talked to before I came here, and I think 3 of the women that I talked to that were former journalists, they all said they would love to come back if the opportunities availed themselves. They would love to come back to journalism, because once you do it, you miss it, even though you can go, at least I think so, you can go to all these other jobs and make more money and work 9 to 5 and have your weekends off and all of that. But real journalists, I believe, still have that gut hunger that newsrooms provide. And even though newsrooms have changed now, and there's a lot of cutbacks, and the salaries are different, and it's not quite the same, there are still some good newsrooms in America where you can get that experience, that level of loyalty, of trust, of good journalism. But leaving the industry, I mean, that's a personal choice, and I'm glad I did it, because I did learn the other side. And even though I enjoyed it to some degree, I was glad that I came back into the fold.
Hi, first off, I'd like to say, Mr. Proctor, thank you so much for taking the time to come speak with us tonight. My name's Max Harris. I'm a PR student here at Penn State.
Okay.
So my question for you is regarding your company. I'd like to ask how your mission statement ties into enforcing a code of conduct and ethics within your clients, and how that works to better communications within these respective companies.
That's great, thank you. Well, my business is called Red Job Coaching and Training, and we work with clients all over the country. And as a executive coach, I also do career coaching, but the other side of my business is also mental health training. I do mental health first aid, suicide prevention. I'm a certified grief counselor. And so I get deep into family business. And yes, that's very confidential stuff. That's very, very confidential stuff. I tell my wife all the time, I'm going to die and I'm going to have 1,000,000 stories in my head that nobody ever knows about. But yes, my business is confidential coaching, and I get as deep in a family as possible. Right now, I'm negotiating a breakup between two brothers that want to split their company, and one wants to go one way and one wants to go the other. And so I'm deep in negotiations with them, and and it's confidential information because we're dealing with millions and millions of dollars. But that's good. Thank you. Did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Luke Vargas. I'm a second-year student, and I work for the Daily Collegian, the independent student-run newspaper here. I'm a sports editor, and so I have a lot of reporters on my staff. Earlier, you mentioned assuming responsibility for a moment where people beneath you or the people you were working with had made a mistake and made an error, and you took a lot of heat for it. And that was something that you had learned from the Marines and a part of the leadership that value. So I wanted to ask you about that specifically. How much responsibility do you assume in those moments? How much of it becomes your fault? And how do you deal with bearing the guilt of those mistakes? Or personally, how do you deal with making mistakes and failure, or the failure of your staff?
Well, you have to. I mean, that's one thing, in the Marine Corps, as you go up in rank, and I was a gunnery sergeant, a platoon sergeant, and so I was in charge of a lot of men. And when they made mistakes, yes, they would get chewed out by me or worse. But I would be talking to the first sergeant or the CEO about the situation because it was my crew. But yes, that to me is the ultimate form of leadership. You just have to take on that mantle of when one of your staff or your unit members makes a mistake. You have to go in and do the mea culpa for the whole team. And that's all part of it. And when I was the editor, in charge of 220 people in Richmond, yes, whatever happens, it's all my fault. It's all my fault. I'll take the brunt. Well, why did you ask that question specifically? Do you have a situation?
So, like any editor, you get in situations, where someone makes a mistake or an error gets past you, and some errors are more grievous than others.
Do you take them out back and lash them, or what?
You make a note, and you make a correction in your story, and you make a note to the readers that a correction had to be made. And that's something that...
You put a note in their file or something?
You make a note in the story that's published at the top of the story. That's typically how the Daily Collegian runs with these things. It'll be
And when it's time for them to get a good story or get promoted, they don't get it, right?
It depends, I guess.
Oh, that depends.
I think anyone can be...
Let me ask this question for Luke. How does he, as an editor, make sure his reporters don't do that again, or create that error? Or what, as an editor, how did you challenge your reporters to know what they're, to check what they were doing?
Well, we just have to have the expectations conversation. And unfortunately, sometimes, I used to tell myself, running a Marine platoon and also running a newsroom is like kindergarten, over and over and over again. And I don't care how talented your crew is, some days it's like kindergarten, and you just have to reinforce over and over and over again. But if it continues, then you have to do something drastic, and that was remove them from the staff or something like that. In our case, Gannett had a policy at one time, you had 3 or 4 mistakes, you were fired. The Gannett, the big newspaper publisher, you had 3 or 4 mistakes in a certain time period, we would fire you. So you don't have to be that drastic, but over time, if mistakes continue, you have to reinforce, and then you have to give that person kind of a warning, like we do in the industry. You're on a PIP, a performance plan, and we're going to work with you, but you have to get better.
Glenn, As a former Marine and a longtime newsroom leader, what do you see as some of the ethical challenges of covering war, and how do you think today's journalists are doing with covering the war in Ukraine from an ethical standpoint?
Well, no, thank you. I think they're doing a lot better than previous, and I think we've had a lot of experience over the years, so they're doing a much, much better job. And they're also going in a lot of hot zones. You know, I mean, they're really in some of the hot zones where, you know, missiles are being fired and you know, and I think that's good, but they absolutely have to be safe, because almost in every war situation we've had correspondents that were killed or injured. So they have to be careful, but I'm glad that they are covering it in intimate detail, so we in the public, not only here in America, but around the world, can see. And the thing is that, you know, as a Marine, I don't like war, and I absolutely, you know, hate that there's war anywhere on our planet, but I am glad that journalists have the wherewithal and the expertise to be able to cover it and bring us, you know, unfortunately, intimate detail. Thank you for that.
Okay, I think we're going to wrap it up, but you seem to sugarcoat the idea of being that first black in a newsroom, or being the only manager in a newscast, in a business operation. Tell us the real deal here. What is it about walking into that situation? And I need it from both perspectives. I need it from the perspective of being a manager, walking into a newsroom and having to deal with a room of white employees. I want also from the perspective of thinking of it from being that lonely reporter that walks into that newsroom. And now I'm the low man on the totem pole dealing with the crew. What are the challenges facing that reporter?
You know the answer to this. Unfortunately, when I walked in the first newsroom, I had done 4 years as a Marine and also a tour in Vietnam. So nobody in the newsroom, white, black, or otherwise, were going to scare me, intimidate me, and if anybody was going to raise hell in the room, it was going to be me. And so in all my jobs, starting with the Daily Local News in Westchester, you know, in many ways, and I hate to say this, but yes, I was a bully. I was an absolute bully because I came out of that environment, but I also thought psychologically that was the only way that I could exist. And that carried me even when I got to Richmond, because there's a thing on the web that and a bunch of people wrote about it when I first got there, and they started asking me questions when they had the whole newsroom gathering when I was introduced as the new editor. And one of the reporters, because in the Richmond newsroom there was an editor's office on the newsroom floor, and then there was an editor's office on the executive floor with the other vice presidents. And so one of the, where's your office going to be, and shouldn't you be on the 4th floor? And it got out, all over the country because people laughed about it. This is my newsroom, I will sit where I want to sit, or something to that effect. And that kind of set the tone from the first day that I was in Richmond, and for the rest of my 7.5 years there as editor. And so I felt being, a first black editor in the Confederacy, or a first black reporter at a place in Westchester, Pennsylvania, or UPI, the Philly Bureau. But I also know that I knew how to take care of myself, and I was not going to let anybody challenge me or overrun me. I was going to be the bully in the place. And not that I'm proud of all those situations, but it got me through all those situations.
No more questions? Oh, Sorry.
Hi, my name is Aiden Harold. I am a lifestyle reporter for the Daily Collegian, and I was just curious about you talked about facing pressure from members of the Black community about whether or not to portray the community in a better light or whether to stick to your journalistic integrity. I was just wondering if you ever saw other reporters sort of have to deal with a similar struggle, either in the Black community or maybe the Latino
Oh,
community or
yes,
any others.
yes, I was just talking about my struggle, but yes, I've seen, gay reporters, Hispanic, reporters, even, see, I explain diversity, and Professor Middlebrook knows this. Diversity to me is, yes, it's gender, it's race, it's sexual orientation, but it's also having folks in my newsroom that are from Harlem, New York, and also from Nebraska. And I want that white kid from Nebraska and that black kid from Harlem to be just like this. That's always been diversity to me. And yes, I want the Harvard kid in my newsroom, but I also want some kid that went to some one-room college in Mississippi. That's diversity to me. So yes, that scenario has happened to, all kinds of reporters for all kinds of different reasons. Because you can be in a newsroom and be the white reporter, but again, you're from Montana and you don't share any of the same scenarios that the Harvard kids do. So yes, I've seen that, throughout all of the diversity circles.
And you sort of answered my second question, but I guess, was there ever, in the cases where you saw this, was there anything in specific that you would tell these reporters? Would you ever have to sit down with them and kind of, what would you say to reporters who were dealing with this, I suppose?
That we're doing.
That may have shown inclinations of just trying to portray
Well, as as all these professors know that have been in newsrooms, and some of you students that have done internships, newsrooms can be a harsh place. Newsrooms can be, they're very strong-willed, and everybody has, certain opinions, and they can be strong places. So you do have to have a backbone in a newsroom, because because you could be stepped on. But the thing is that, yes, I would talk to them and help them understand that they're wanted here, they're needed here, their diverse mindset, their diverse culture is needed here, and that's why they're represented.
Thank you.
And on that note, I'm going to do the right thing and say thank you, Glenn Proctor, for joining us tonight. Thank you. I know